Good morning. Jay Del Rio appreciates your attendance and welcomes you to the webinar, Nearshoring in Mexico, Challenges and Opportunities. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bernardo Del Rio, and I'm managing partner of Jay Del Rio, a firm of accountants and advisors whose motto is helping companies do business in Latin America. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our partner, Alex Delgado, the head of our direct investment advisor. Alejandro has landed over 400 direct investment projects for global companies and has been an advisor to Mexico's ministries of finance and economy, 7 state governments, leading business organizations such as CCE, Concamin, Coparmex, amongst others.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this webinar. We want to take you to a small trip that explains what we call the Great Shift. It's something that Bernie and I have baptized as such. We'll see how it sticks. This is a set of events that have disrupted global value chains more than ever, and thus has questioned and reinvented the core principles of production, manufacturing, sourcing, and distribution worldwide. Also, we want to explain why Mexico is one of the most suitable options for this new quest for a production safe haven, and also why this option has its challenges and how we are addressing them here at J. Del Rio. So over the last 30 years, we all saw a world dominated by globalization. Everything was globalized, even children. Now, in our cost reduction obsession, or more politely put, comparative advantage doctrine, it seemed there were no real challenges for companies and manufacturers. Distance, culture, beliefs, health, logistics, and what have you. We had an answer for everything. A renowned writer, Thomas Friedman, wrote a great book, which he entitled The World is Flat. Well, it seems now that it's not so flat. Let's see what has happened lately. Okay, so we have that even in the total globalization mindset and its hurdles in the past decade with the Arab Spring and the rising labor costs in China, as of 2018, the magnitude of events grew and started to pile up. It all came back to a break with the COVID pandemic. In 2020, the global supply chain pressure index skyrocketed at record highs. The US's dependence on Asian sourcing has had the largest impact ever. Factory shutdowns, at least 20 listed companies in China have shut operations, which accounted for around 6% of China's GDP. Stockouts and shortages collapsed in demand due lockdowns. In the US, the stockouts rose as quickly from 12% to 20% in March, all the way up to 50% by May 2020.
I think this is really interesting if we're looking at the red line, which is food and beverages, which is the second highest line. And that, you could say, explains the baby formula, the formula problem that has been. Now sriracha sauce is in short supply. Beer is in some places in short supply.
We saw shortages in almost everything. I mean, from diapers to sodas to
parts for if you crashed your car and they had to replace a part for the car. It became a huge issue.
The first big hit was food and beverage, but you have a Mexico that we will see later on that jumped in and pretty much resupplied the US. But you have the electronics here, and the electronics today are on the top of the stockouts, and that's remained, and we can see it in the microprocessors on the ship's crisis, right? We saw that the congestion and bottlenecks throughout,
Long Beach.
Right. I mean, transit time to ship goods from ports in China to Los Angeles doubled, and container costs, well, pretty much went to the roof. The cost to move a single 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles increased
Almost
five
10
times.
10 times.
Right. So crazy, right? And if you found one, right? But things were complicated already, and they got worse, right? When we started to see the oil prices. And here you have this graph. I mean, look at this. Everything went to the roof, and the Russia-Ukraine war has even worsened things. It has sent price all the way over to above
For the oil price.
For the oil price, but also commodities. I mean,
grain.
right. So it all then ended up with an inflation crisis, inflation rates that we haven't seen in decades, maybe in the 1970s, Bernie. I mean, we didn't see these rates.
Correct. And here, just to chime in, the funny thing is we've been seeing higher inflation in the US than Mexico. And this is really a first since I was born. Like Mexico has always had higher inflation than the US, even though Mexico does have kind of a massaged inflation number that we give much more stimulus for oil, gasoline related products.
Things were complicated already and got even worse with the labor shortage that we saw in the pandemic, workers pretty much isolated, and now we have the big resignation, which adds up to this line of problems. And a challenge that all companies now are seeing, which is the carbon footprint in the United States Sustainable Development Goals. And all companies, global companies competing, correct, they have to comply with these. Things are in an unprecedented stage. You know, President Trump's tariffs were created the first hints of a long-standing shift in US trade policy, but this has been ratified. I mean, this has become one of the only items in the US political agenda to become bipartisan and have been ratified by President Biden.
Correct. Even though there are kind of smoke signals that they might be looking at something to kind of alleviate inflation, but from like there to them actually reducing it could be a while.
There have been some signs that due to the inflation that we're seeing in the US, there might be some easing in the tariffs to the Chinese products. So the impact in supply chain from China is stark. 30 to 60% year-on-year reductions in most of the products impacted with tariffs. And here you can see these slides. I mean, it's just amazing, the numbers. I mean, in just a few months, you can have this impact when these tariffs went on into effect. What happened? Who are the winners? Well, it seems by this graph that Canada, Japan, but mostly Mexico were the winners, which in only 3 months, Mexico took over the sourcing of almost $1 billion from of US imports from China. I mean, this is really radical, and it is just what happened. So after what we have seen so far, it seems the big shift is here for the long run. Companies are building up inventories, half finished or finished products left in reserve, which can be sold if demand suddenly ramps up or if fresh supply fails. This has big costs in terms of tying up money. The world's 3,000 biggest companies have increased their holding by the equivalent of 1% of GDP since 2019, according to the Economist's analysts. So here we have an interesting information that the MIT is giving us, the MIT for Transportation and Logistics. And here you can see what's the strategy for each of the shiftings in manufacturing. And here you have that cost and volume are key factors for decision makers, but also closeness to the market. The MIT is telling us here that large volume, lowest price will stay in China. Mid-low cost goods, but highly sensitive to market distances, really moving to Mexico. And of course, some others are reshoring to the United States, especially high-end consumer goods. The question then is, aside from lead time advantages, why move production to Mexico? That is the question for us. And here we can have a list of interesting data and interesting facts that really make Mexico an interesting option and sometimes a must for relocation. Mexico is not only the 10th most populated nation, but one of the youngest with a median of 29 years. And one with very big talent potential by being one of the largest producers of engineers with over 130,000 graduating yearly. Mexico has already a production profile for high quality and demand by being the 9th largest exporter in the world with over 2% of the total world trade. Mexico exports more than all LATAM, including Brazil combined. Now, the complexity of our manufacturing in Mexico has been reflected in the complexity index that it's shown in the 2020 ratings, where we rank 26. And we know that over 55% of all products produced and exported by Mexico are highly sophisticated products. Mexico's free trade network also gives a preferential access to over 70% of the world's GDP, including the US with the USMCA. This means no tariffs, no supply chains, and no tariffs on final product exported to North America. Highest exporting sectors are automobiles, electronics, auto parts, aerospace, medical devices, and food products. Now, there's a special mention that I'd like to make about IT services. The IT services sector has really boomed in Mexico. The substantiated growth over the years has turned Mexico into the 3rd largest exporter of IT services.
This would really also take into consideration contact centers like BPOs, like call centers, stuff like that as well, right?
Right.
So it's not only software companies.
It's everything that it's related to IT, including communications, telecommunications, and information technology. And it goes from KPOs, BPOs, call centers, but also to software companies, and something that, by the way, boomed during the pandemic. We have a record high on FDI of 19.5 billion, where nearly 8.8 billion were greenfield investments. We haven't seen that in decades. I mean, most of the investments are new investments, new companies. Labor costs, logistics, freights, tariffs.
I think that line was location, location, location.
Yeah, that I know that's an old saying in FDI world, but I guess it's not only related with the closeness to the U.S. market, but also to some other specifics that Mexico has, like I said, talent, energy, and so forth. So labor costs, logistics, freight, tariffs, which at the end give us a substantial U.S. total landed cost advantage that may range from 25 to even 80%. That's just something that is really moving the needle. Also, some studies have given a net operating cost savings of 20%. So we believe that this is something to start analyzing if you're not thinking on moving production, if you're not really understanding how to approach this dilemma. So some of the companies that have come to Mexico, we see some of them, they're more than, of course, coming over that not only that were part of the 16.5 billion and part of the 8 billion that I just mentioned. So we spoke about the opportunity. Let's talk about the challenges. The number one that I'd like to cite is that Mexico is not really one country. It's more than 3, sometimes it can be even 5 countries. In terms of culture, governments, infrastructure, clusters, productivity, education, cost, security, and society. I mean, it's a whole range of differences, and you know this, Bernie.
Correct, and I think if you're thinking Mexico is just one monolithic entity, Well, it would be like thinking Alabama is the same thing as California is the same thing as New York.
Right.
And so maybe if you're in the US, you're used to those differences, but when you go outside of the US, there are differences within, even smaller countries have differences, but Mexico is not a small country.
Yeah, Mexico is a big country that has stark differences in all these aspects that I mentioned. And yes, you need to understand your company's fit. But there is something that goes throughout Mexico, which is President Lopez Obrador's agenda, which really is translating into state-owned energy monopolies, austerity programs that really hit government services, and a shift from productivity and competitiveness seeking public policy to a short-term vision of sovereignty, namely energy, food, democracy, and a government for the masses. So there is a shift there. By the way, this also means centralizing power, which has created a disconnect with the state governments, which might have an agenda, might have an interest, but the federal government has a different one. So we need to cope with that. We need to face that. We need to plan over that, and we need to make sure that things are rightly in place. Now, security is something that merits information, planning, and protocols. So we need to know what's happening, when it's happening, and where it's happening. And we also move into that, and we need to talk about it whenever there is an investment. I would only mention, for the sake of time, that resources, infrastructure, and other important factors for foreign investors merit deep understanding for each region and city. The same goes for talent and labor pool. Availability, turnover, unemployment, and local practices can go a long way in one's productivity and long-term success. As far as rule of law, we always ask our clients to have their legal counsel as part of the project's team. And this is very important. We do not provide legal services as we are totally immersed in efficiency and productivity factors. We're landing projects only focused on how competitive this project will be, the products will be. So we always recommend that. And Bernie, if you can give us your take on
Sure.
this.
And we have great friends that are lawyers, but we like them to be on the other side of the table. So, and I think that the clients gain from their perspective a lot of things. So rule of law is a big issue, and I think we were going to talk about employment next, and I'll grab the mic before you, but employment is another area where having the right legal advice from your lawyers will be very important, especially if we're talking a large manufacturing company, 2,000 people, 3,000 people, whatever. Proper labor law advice is critical.
Right. And why don't you give us your take on taxes?
I don't mind if I may. The taxes are my specialty, and that's one of our core businesses, is to make sure that we keep people on the straight and narrow, out of trouble with the government, and that's why helping them with kind of a turnkey solution so that we're clear as to the proper way to structure things. I think that's a great value that we offer.
With this wave of nearshoring, with the Mexico opportunity and the challenges we have reviewed, we at J del Rio have a service section created only for companies and investors that want to move production and or sourcing to Mexico. Experience, a multidisciplinary approach, a strong network, and work ethics are some of our principles. We're region city-wise agnostic and take no fees or commissions from anyone other than our client.
That's a huge difference in the sense that when you're trying to look at one of these projects, you have to take advice given based on who it's given from. So if I'm, and that's kind of the sad thing, that the Mexican government got rid of ProMexico, which their job was precisely to act as a more neutral player within the states. So like They didn't care if you went to Aguascalientes or Jalisco, as long as it stayed in Mexico. So you had kind of a more fair arbiter, if you would. In this case, with the dissolution of ProMexico, that kind of unbiased opinion is gone. And so that's why we try to be agnostic in the sense that we don't care if you go to Monterrey, we don't care if you go to Coahuila. It's what's best for each individual company.
Our goal, Bernie, as you said it, is finding the best location for the needs and requirements of the project, which are always unique, by the way. Each project is unique, and landed efficiently in order to make it a long-term, productive, competitive, and a successful manufacturing and services project. We offer end-to-end services from strategic planning to the project landing. For those foreign investors that are still open to decide on the site options that Mexico offers, we make a deep profiling of the project, its needs and specs, and provide the investors management with the right information on the matter. We have developed all this information, and we go into the overall information on Mexico on the ones that you're seeing on the screen, but we also go on at the subnational level, and we start really seeing which sites make sense for this industry. So if you have an IT project, it might be a different place totally than if you have a car project, or an automobile project, or an auto parts project, or a plastics project. So we know the strengths of Monterrey in many of these sectors, but we also know the strengths of Guadalajara in IT, but it is not only Guadalajara. And we know that the strengths of Querétaro in the aerospace industry, and we know the strengths on the services sector for Mexico City, but we also know the strengths in the medical devices sector in Tijuana, and so forth. So we need to make a deep study that has a relation with the industry that the company is coming from. So once we have that, we developed a site location decision matrix that combines all factors with hard data and includes the weighted relevance rate that our clients give us. So here you have an example of a 12-factor decision matrix, where we see this is a real life example of something we just landed somewhere in Mexico that had to do with the electronics industry. If you can see here, then you have the hard data on each of these 12 factors coming from the states and the cities where the project has a potential. And as you can see, we have the electronics in trade, international trade, the international trade growth, the real competitive advantage that the place may have, the complexity index, the wages, labor pool, unemployment, distance to point of sale, freight costs, lease costs, security and crime. And here, if you can see, our client gave us this relevance rate, and for them, wages was the number one, even more than security or even more than labor pool. But here you have a profile. Other companies might have a different sensitivity. So we take that, we take the real hard data, and then on your right in orange, you can see the score distribution. In this instance, we saw 3 cities that came up on top as the more relevant or the more competitive cities for the project.
It helps you draw up a short list. So instead of just grabbing a dart and saying, hey, there's the map of Mexico, I'm going to throw it and let's see where it lands, we're actually going down the list and creating a short list of where could this project land? Where could it go and be effective? And it's not going to be the end result.
First of all, there are myths, there's misinformation, and you've got to get the right information. Number 2, you have to compare apples with apples, pears with pears in relation with your project. Thirdly, you have to take into consideration what the management team of the company really wants. Do they want to have a big labor pool, or they want to have the shortest time to lead time? or yeah, to the border or to Chicago or might be California. So
or I need a rail spur because I'm going straight.
Right.
Straight,
right. We get hard data and then we mix it, we compare it, and we have a final list that the data give us. Then we move to the next stage. And let me tell you something, Bernie. This stage, it's really important because we have the laser focus. In other words, once we know that there are 3 cities that are finalists, that have all the options, that are capable of receiving this project, then we do the laser focus analysis, which you can see in your screen, that really it gets the information in detail: cost information, cultural information, society information, security information, even availability of local incentives, and how's that going to play in the project.
All of this can be a la carte, right? So if need be, like a client can say, yes, I want to include that. I would like as much hand holding as possible, which is usually the case. Like if you're going to a strange country to start a new investment, the more hand holding we can give you, I think it's a value for the client. So here we actually accompany the client on those roadshows. So like we travel around, we see the different sites, we go to the meetings and see what works.
You get the information, but that information has to be double checked. So you have to go on the road. I mean, you have to walk.
And your number 1 person can end up being your number 3 person, and your number 3 person be your number
You wouldn't
1.
believe how many times that happens.
You actually see
right
that there's just something in this space that it makes more sense.
It can be the quality of labor. It can be the educational centers, the training centers. It can be maybe industrial land availability at the end of the day, because in your information you have 40 industrial parks, but at the end of the day, most of them are filled. I mean, especially now, right? So yes, this information, along with some interesting points that you can see on your slide, where we take you to interviews with other companies like yours, not competition maybe, but companies that will talk to you
in your sector,
in your language, and will tell you what's really happening there, not only what the government is telling you. And that's pretty, I mean, and I want to really expand a little bit about it. State governments do their job, which is attracting investment by selling the state. We don't sell the state. We give you the information, the nutritional information, if you will. Okay, so we get all these visits. We take you to industrial organizations, potential suppliers, HR firms, and other stakeholders that are important for your operation and that are important in the state. Once we finish with that, then we have a final decision. But the final decision might be taken with a slight twist, which is the interest of the government on our project. That might matter in the future, not only because of the amount of dollars, but more than that is the attitude of a government, of a state government, that will help you go through the project, go through the...
That can be a big difference.
Believe me.
It's not only the government support, it's what attitude are we getting here, right?
Definitely.
And we always talk about the government incentives really being kind of the icing on the cake.
I couldn't stress it enough to say it. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that the project is productive and competitive, aside of incentives. Incentives are only maybe a way of showing how interested is the government.
Yes, and they're temporary. Most of the times, the impact of an incentive goes away. But if your project is slated to last 40 years, it better make economic sense without the incentives,
right? Just
so that you're not running into problems down the road.
Right. I mean, totally right. And that's what we believe. I mean, aside from incentives, maybe you will not have a big incentive package for your project, but you will have a friendly government that will help you, and we will be there with you along the way in all the landing necessary for your project to start running. We help you pretty much close the agreements, do the aftercare with the government institutional relations, the incentives compliance and reporting, which is, believe me, is critical. As you can see there, we have the services so that to make you USMCA compliant, so that your products can be exported with no tariffs and you can get the right supply from overseas and also from Mexican companies. Our conclusion is the big shift. 97% of the 600 experience a supply chain disruption related to COVID-19. Now, the interesting thing is the response that they're giving to this problem. 73% of them are relocating, are resourcing, are restructuring their supply for their products and their industry. So it's interesting. But the thing is, for us, where and how to relocate are the big questions. Information, ethics, and experience are key to a successful FDI project. Thank you very much, and I'm open for the questions.
We have already picked our location. Can you help us with other phases of the project? So I need some hand holding. Like, we've already picked Mexicali. What can you do?
Right, so we take them to phase 2. We do the laser focus analysis on Mexicali's regions, Mexicali sectors, what's really happening there, and we do the show, the road show. We go to Mexicali, whom we know many of the relevant actors in Mexicali and in Baja California, by the way, and we help them land the project in the right place, in the right site, with the right services, with the right incentive package, and with the right federal agreements in place. So yeah, we do help them. We've done that, I mean, for many customers, and most of our clients remain.
You talked a lot about industry or manufacturing. Can you help with other services like call centers or software centers?
Right. Yeah, we've done that many times. We do that. There are other specific requirements that these companies have, and sometimes it seems like they can just go by the flow or go with the flow and go to Guadalajara. But no, I mean, you really have other options. You have all types of options. It all depends on what kind of services you're doing, what kind of engineering you're offering, what your needs are, and believe me, we can be of much help. We've done this in Estado de Mexico, we've done this in Guadalajara, we've done this in Querétaro, we've done this in the north of the country, where there are a lot of strengths, and you really need to find out what's suited for your project. You might have like some OEMs that have a large budget for salaries, which, by the way, even if in Mexico, these are very competitive in comparison with the US, the US salaries still
much less.
Right, it's still much less, but still you need to plan, because there's the salaries are moving up, and you need to know what the labor pool is on that, what the engineering pool is on that, and we do that, and also the resources that you need are different than the ones needed for manufacturing.
Please outline the types of economic development incentives which are generally available from the federal, state, and local governments for a greenfield manufacturing facility or the expansion of an existing manufacturing facility.
Right, so incentives, highly valuable incentives for companies, in our experience, have to do with training and HR incentives. They have to do with on-site training and also with management and engineering training. That sometimes there's a gap between the labor available and the engineers available and the technicians available that you have to fill somewhere and some way. And so it's important that that cost has to be considered, and most of the times governments help with that, help with resources, help with
And
local.
those can be large amounts.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've seen millions of dollars of cost in larger projects, and this is something that differentiates some states, because some states have been very creative, very aggressive, and also very smart in the way they have approached. They have created facilities where they have pretty much your machinery, it's in that facility. So the guys can help run the machinery, help supervise the machinery. So these are training and management resources for them, but also they have payroll tax. Most of us have payroll tax incentives, and some others have land incentives. And I mean, it can go even to cash incentives. So there's a real, and it really varies state from state. And also the federal incentives have become very complex now, because ProMexico was eliminated, and ProMexico had a whole tool for that, which was very useful in bringing Audi, BMW, and other companies that were here.
Kia.
And Kia, all of them were helped by ProMexico, where we worked there for a while, and it was very useful. That's no longer in place. So now you have to run, you know, the halls of the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Finance to really tap on some incentives that you can get on that.
Are you seeing a trend towards regionalization? So if I'm dealing with the US market, I source in Mexico. If I'm dealing in Europe, I'm not going to source in Mexico, but rather I would source in Turkey or Bulgaria or somewhere else, like by regions.
Right. I guess the big shift is precisely that. I mean, from globalization to regional integration. That's really happening. You know, time to market and lead time have become so key into this mix that it's something that you know, production and procurement managers are working on, and that's why Mexico has become a real option for the nearshoring needs of these companies, because they need to integrate production in North America, and distance is important. Logistics has become key, but also talent, and also you know, labor shortages and so forth. So yes, regional integration has become like the new trend.
And everything is dealing with inflation. So
yeah, I guess inflation, what matters about inflation is the cost of inventory at sea, right? So if you want to move things from China, it might take 10 to 12 weeks. So that's inventory running on the waters of the Pacific Ocean. So you have to shorten that, and you have to be, you know, just in sequence and just in time just was pretty much left behind now. I mean, what matters is, as I said, the 3,000 largest companies in the world are pretty much stocking over 1% of the global GDP, only to have available inventory.
Well, so that I can have my coffee.
Right, correct. So now, have you tried to buy a car in Mexico lately?
I have.
Well, I have a friend that's been waiting for 5 months for his car to arrive. So these things are happening, and these things we're seeing in the US, as we saw it in the graph, that the US was hit most hardly than most of the regions in the world because of its dependence on Asian products.
But we'll see a trend with Europe with gas shortages flowing. So we might see something coming up there.
Right.
And with that, I think we're at the end. So at J Del Rio, we do appreciate your interest, and thank you all, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.